Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, highlights from our annual C4ISR conference. We talked to the nation's top experts about the latest in electronic warfare and everything from orbital awareness to AI for the battlefields. Plus, a new report says U.S. bases in the Arctic are not prepared enough for climate change. And a historic destroyer takes on water. Also, a profile of an Invictus Games athlete finally getting her time to compete. We have all that coming up for you on today's episode. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. This week marked the annual C4ISR conference, a yearly exploration of the latest topics in interconnected battle spaces of today and the future. The event brought in a long list of top names in the C4ISR space, covering the latest in joint warfighting, command and control, geospatial intelligence, and a host of other topics. First up, a conversation on the instruments of electronic warfare, featuring a top Pentagon official and the Air Force's Director of Electromagnetic Spectrum Superiority. Get a load of that title. Let's check it out.
To start us off, I want to talk a little bit about the conflict in Ukraine. For years, Russia has been the go-to adversary used for examples of electronic warfare in action, whether it's accusations of jamming or spoofing GPS, disrupting communications, or engaging in information warfare or cyber warfare. That's just the example that's been used. Over the last few months, I'm curious, what have we been able to learn about Russia's actual EW capability as opposed to what has been said over the last few years? Dave, I'd love it if you could take this first.
Sure. I think it's interesting that when you compare the 2014 operations with what's going on now, it's a very different scenario when you're lined up on the border and you're doing operations from you're doing EW operations from the border, but not going very far into the country. It gets very different when you're being mobile and you're trying to get into the center of that country. I think the EW coordination and synchronization becomes very challenging. You get into those urban scenarios, I think it becomes even more complicated. And I think what we're seeing in the Ukraine is a resistance where the dependence of EMS isn't there in some of the kind of the more peer-to-peer operations that we would expect to see. So where you see the effectiveness of EW operations and where we see Russia being very good, potentially limited effectiveness against a neighbor where you're well into that country, you're very mobile, and the dependence on the EMS isn't there in kind of the more traditional fights that we see.
Is that what you would have expected coming into this, or is this something that we're sort of learning as it happens?
I think we're learning it as it happens or as it goes. I think there's a lot of learning going on about the kind of the state of Russian EW and kind of the Russian hierarchy in general as it relates to their defense. Seen a lot of open source information about about kind of the state of how their budget's managed, about how well trained their operators are, and we all know that training for EW is a very hard problem. If you don't have well trained operators, then the effectiveness of those EW systems becomes difficult. If you compile that with forward moving operations, right, that challenges it even more. You're well embedded into the country. It's not something where you're lined up on the border. I don't think we expected it to the degree that we see it. I think we expected a much stronger EW presence, which isn't to say that it's not there, but I think the degree of coordination and synchronization in these types of operations is such that the untrained operator will have a hard time pulling off those types of events successfully.
Tad, let me bring you into this conversation. What are you seeing today in Ukraine as opposed to what we've been talking about with Russia's EW capabilities in recent years?
Yeah, well, so I appreciate the question. And of course, getting into the details, what we're seeing day to day from the threats and intel updates, we can't get into those specifics.
Sure.
But to Mr. Tremper's point, I think anything that relates to electromagnetic warfare and a country's and a military's ability to execute that mission reflects some very interesting things. It reflects whether or not they have the technological capability to do that. And then, of course, more importantly, do they have the human capital to execute that mission? And there's no surprise that as we look to 21st century warfare, we're going to see an increase in electromagnetic warfare used, particularly in the beginning, to shape the operational environment. And then all through the course of the conflict, that's what we can expect, wherever that conflict may take place. In this case, in the European area of responsibility, and specifically in Ukraine, we're learning a lot about what Russia has been investing their money in, the sophistication of their equipment, the reliability of their equipment, and their soldiers and military members, personnel, with their ability to execute that mission in a synchronized fashion. And so I think it gives us some insight of where certain countries are, where we are, where we need to be, where we want to be. And that's certainly very helpful.
And what would a conference about C4ISR topics be without a session on artificial intelligence? Here's part of our talk with Marine Lieutenant General Michael Groen, Director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center.
When we hear about the Pentagon talk about AI, a big emphasis is always moving fast. And so how much of moving fast has to do with the competition with China, and what does moving fast mean, and what does it look like to you? Is the Jake moving fast?
Yeah, so great question, and of course I'll start with it's not just the Jake that's working on AI inside the department. We've got really good efforts going across the services. Many of the defense agencies have their own AI programs, and so as we continue to try to help enable those efforts to grow across the department, what we're also trying to do is integrate them into an enterprise, and at least have a federated environment where we're readily sharing data across the department. We're readily sharing data across services. I think we all talk about JADC2. I mean, the core of that is any sensor to any shooter, or in our context, any sensor to any algorithm that that wants to integrate that data. So we're really we're working hard at not just building shiny object AI applications, but really starting to try to get to a competitive enterprise. And I think one of the things that you see we see around us every day now, of course, is what's going on in Ukraine. And to me, it's just striking what where the standard Cold War lens, you'd look at massive steel and massive firepower. Now you can see the impact of precision capabilities, the information environment. I mean, it really is. You can see the shadows of a change in the nature, or at least in the in the application of warfare here in in this information age. And so we're really eager to learn those lessons so that we can transform the Department of Defense and become competitive with or better than our opponents, who we know are studying this capability just as hard.
When we come back, more from the C4ISRNet conference, and later an inspiring story of an Invictus Games athlete. Welcome back. The U.S. military has long enjoyed a technological edge over its adversaries, but that advantage has come under pressure in recent years, raising the stakes for organizations like the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as DARPA. Here's a portion of the C4ISRNet conference panel on how to win the tech race.
I think what's happening provides a big sense of urgency or exclamation point on the importance of fielding commercial technology. We're seeing autonomous systems, commercial satellite imagery, secure tactical communication. We're seeing commercial technologies that can be applied today changing warfare. So we're watching a 20th century industrialized force that Russia has built be challenged and we hope defeated by a more agile force. I mean, Ukrainians are doing a fantastic job in terms of their morale and pulling together a national resistance, but the technology they're using is commercial, and they're using more modern methods than the Russians are. So a good example would be commercial satellite imagery. This has allowed the US intelligence community, who correctly identified what was going to happen and told the world that, we could then share that with our allies and partners and the media. So the whole world could see Putin's lies as they unfolded. So this is a game changer. The amount of proliferation of commercial satellites that give us that synthetic aperture radar imaging for us to be able to see what's happening in the world. You can't hide if you're a lying authoritarian power like Russia anymore. The world sees it in real time. So this is a game changer. More commercial technologies are going to be changing the game. Look what's happening with the the autonomous systems that are destroying Russian tanks, as an example. We need to be fielding more of these, the agile, the lower cost weapons that really are going to put the, yesterday's weapons at risk.
And I want to hear from Stephanie on this too, but before we do, can you talk about what that means? Like, how does it manifest itself? Are there conversations saying, hey, we need to put more money toward commercial satellite imagery or unmanned systems, or are there different mechanisms to say, hey, this is something that is going to be a priority, we need to plan for different contract vehicles in the future? I'm just trying to see how this plays out.
Those conversations are happening. I think this illustrates how important and urgent those changes are. And what we're seeing is, and we can talk about this later, a big topic in and of itself, our system is not geared to rapidly make changes. And that's largely how fast can we move money to the areas where it's needed. Whole separate topic we can come back to.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Great. Stephanie.
Sure. Well, so I completely agree with Mike. I'm going to sort of make three quick points. One is, of course, everybody in the DoD, if there's something that we have that's available or could be quickly accelerated of immediate benefit, those questions are asked, answered, and kind of dealt with. So we don't just step back and say, we look at the future, don't talk to us. So everybody is all in wherever appropriate. Second, I'm going to point out that a lot of the things that we were talking about that are being of use are things that DARPA invested in at different points in the past. So we, for example, are responsible for Javelin missiles, which have played obviously a fairly significant role, and unmanned airborne vehicles, things like that. So that's kind of useful for us to be able to see what kinds of investments we made in the past have really been beneficial today. That helps us think about what we might be doing right or wrong. And then the most interesting thing about all of this is that because we do live in the future, what's happening in Ukraine is a really good test for us to look at the programs that we have and say, if these had been ready today, what difference would they have been made? And are we in fact on the right track, or do we need to make changes? So that's kind of the DARPA perspective.
Can you elaborate on something, a program like Javelin, and what that means for how the conversation changes either within the Pentagon or with Congress, or even within your headquarters? Like, what do you say besides, like, yes, this worked, but how do you kind of pull lessons learned from that?
Well, where it tends to allow us to think has to do with how something like Javelin very specifically would be more tied to the variable kinds of uses that you might be able to put something to. Is something very niche oriented, or did you design it for something that ultimately can have multiple purposes and multiple uses? And so what scenarios were originally envisioned relative to what scenarios are they being put to use today? And then similarly, we look at current programs and say, what are we currently thinking they might be used for? And how does what's happening in Ukraine change our thought process on whether or not those investments are appropriate, or whether, as you were originally asking, we need to double down on a different area, or we need to think a little bit more creatively.
Are there areas that in the last 6 or 8 weeks you guys have said, hey, we need to double down in specific areas, or you've said, hey, we need to rethink how this might work? And It's too early to go into specifics, I understand, but I guess I'm asking just broadly if there are areas that that's happened.
Well, so obviously, there'll be a historical assessment, at some point in time.
Sure.
And I think the harder problem is that a lot of the things that that might be happening are things I really can't talk about in this kind of a forum. What I can say is that there are a number of sort of warfighting constructs that we have been working on for the last couple of years across the entire department. So not just DARPA, but in concert with all of the services, where we can readily say, if the things that we were trying to get done 5 years from now were ready today, we believe they would have made a significant difference.
Okay.
So in some ways, it hasn't changed our minds, but in the areas that were most important to us, I think it's reinforced for us that we just need to move more quickly.
And in headlines from around the military, a new report says that U.S. military bases in the Arctic are underprepared for the impacts of climate change. A study by the Department of Defense's Inspector General found that problems such as cracked roadways caused by warming conditions aren't being adequately planned for. Visits to the military's 6 northernmost installations showed that none were making the required assessments on how to plan for damage. And a decommissioned World War II era destroyer docked near Buffalo, New York, was in danger of being lost recently as it took on water and began listing to one side. Crews on site worked to repair and save the historic vessel, named USS the Sullivans, after a breach in the aft starboard side opened up last week. Officials at the scene said they did not have a good sense of the scale of the damage.
The breach is aft of midship. It's also on the starboard side of the ship. So as you're looking at her from this end, it looks even worse than it is if you were looking at her from the bow. It's just tilting back and to the right. It could be a rip, it could be a hole. Without an underwater team to investigate and give me more information, we just don't know what we're dealing with yet.
When we come back, the latest from our personal finance expert on how to monitor your checking account. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks about how to keep close tabs on your checking account.
Remember the time when monitoring your checking account meant using a check register or waiting for your bank statement? Many younger consumers don't, thanks to online and mobile banking. Digital banking does make it much easier and more convenient to track your expenses, but the convenience may also mean you're not monitoring as often as you should, nor are you actually balancing your account monthly. Think about this. The more transactions you make, the more often you should be monitoring. Make it a habit to check at least once or twice a week. You're looking for accuracy and correct account balances, not to mention any fraudulent or unauthorized purchases. It's also a great way to improve your financial situation by avoiding overspending and making sure you have extra funds for the unexpected. Even though checks aren't widely used anymore, it doesn't mean you don't need to balance your checking account regularly. Monitoring your account keeps you aware of where your money is going always, which is a fundamental step in keeping to a budget. And the better you are at sticking to a budget, the better you'll be able to meet your financial goals for the future.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more of our coverage, be sure to head on over to Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com for the latest. And to wake up to headlines from across the military and defense spaces every weekday, sign up for our Early Bird Brief. And make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And when we come back, one Invictus Games athlete finally gets her chance to shine. Welcome back. When we spoke to Navy Information Technician First Class Ruth Freeman at the tail end of 2019, she was preparing for her first Invictus Games. But when the COVID-19 pandemic struck in 2020, the games were canceled, dashing her chances to compete in her first Invictus sitting volleyball tournament. Now, 2.5 years later, Freeman was able to attend the event, which kicked off April 16th in the Netherlands, and we're finally able to bring you her story. Have a look.
My name is Ruth Freeman. I work in the Navy as an information systems technician, and I am part of the sitting volleyball team. April 14, 2016, I was diagnosed with metastatic papillary thyroid cancer. Thyroid cancer usually doesn't like spread fast. It's easy to treat and stuff, but after the surgery, when they did the pathology, I had 3 different variants. One of them is aggressive, so they took out 197 lymph nodes, 2 of my parathyroid glands, my thyroid, and from there I had a lot of complications from the treatment. So my spinal accessory nerve was damaged, and one of the complications that I got, my right trap is paralyzed. So I don't have full range of movement, but since then it's ongoing. There's still days that I'm just I can't get up, or I'm just in so much pain. They're having a hard time controlling my pain, so that's something, and my pain is spreading too, so yeah, and I'm sometimes just looking at myself in the mirror, I could tell my shoulders getting worse and worse, but it's been tough. Past 3 years. So. I played volleyball. That's the sport I played when I was stationed in Japan in Misawa Air Force Base. I didn't think I'll be able to do sports again. I was always fatigued. I'm right-hand dominant, so I didn't think I could play volleyball again since there's a lot of with the arm and the hitting and stuff. So I was in a bad place. When I first got introduced to the adaptive sports, I found the sports that I really liked and actually continued training at home. Adaptive sports, it's life-changing. You meet people that will become your family. They're there to motivate you, to help you, and it actually helped me mentally and physically, especially being able to play volleyball again. I mean, yes, I still have to do a lot of adjustments because of my shoulder and the pain, but I just try to give my best. We have a lot of amazing athletes in our team.
1, 2, 3, USA!
I had to figure out different ways to hit the ball. I can't reach as far as I could as before, so trying to see what works. Or most of the time after playing for a while and just the pushing and the setting and the serving, it just kills my shoulder. Yeah, I love it. I haven't been this active, and actually I've been more active now since I got introduced to adaptive sports than before I was even diagnosed.
What happens when you find out you make the team?
So I got an email through the Team Navy. It's my inbox got full all the congratulations, and I was very excited and honored. Especially it's only been a year since I started adaptive sports. I was actually really down, having a hard time until they released the roster, and I saw my name there, and whew, sorry. But yeah, it's a big deal for me, especially a lot of Team Navy, especially the coaches, and because I train at home too, so they know I was having a hard time this past couple months, and just hearing that I made the team meant a lot. So it helped me get out of that state to where I didn't want to do anything. So yeah. Like I said, it's life-changing, being able to going from not being able to do anything, going through treatments and stuff, to being able to perform, play all these different sports. It's very motivating, and just being around everyone that has all these different inspiring stories. Just for me, this adaptive sports, all the camps, Warrior Games, Invictus Games is just very life-changing, and it's something that I look forward to every time, and just being part of that family, it's a big thing for me. So. It means a lot. I could prove to myself that I could still push through, I could still fight, and not just that, but also show others that are going through something similar that it's still possible. They could find their new normal and just keep fighting and pushing and just not give up.
The U.S. went on to win bronze in sitting volleyball on April 18th. And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.